Hi, my name is Christina. I am Whilst Iris Snaps on Instagram and Whilst Iris Snaps Designs, and this is a video about cross stitch. This is Flosstube number 11, and I had hoped to go with a Halloween theme for this video, but I'm a little later filming than planned, but I'm going to press ahead with the theme anyway. I know a lot of stitchers stitch Halloween all year round, I certainly do. So I've got my pumpkin earrings in, I've got my coffee in an Emma Bridgewater Halloween mug, so let's just go for it, shall we? So what else do I have to share with you? I've got some stitching from the archives with a Halloween theme, of course. I have the Halloween exchange that I did with my stitchy BFF April, who is April May June Stitcher on Instagram and on Flosstube. I have some previous Halloween ornaments that I've stitched. I have some purchases, two of which are Halloween charts. I have some stitchy kindness. I have the first of two new releases, my Black Sampler 2021 sampler, which is my contribution towards Black Sampler November, the hashtag devised by Jacob from Modern Folk Embroidery. I have my second release, Mary Vallack 1781, and then I will finish with an update on the fundraiser that I did for breast cancer research and care during the month of October, Eliza M. Stone 1881. So let's get cracking, shall we? First up, stitching from the archives. Oh, I'm going to get glare, aren't I? Yes, of course. And this is Something Wicked by La-di-da. And don't La-di-da do incredible Halloween charts? And this is one that I stitched for my sister around, we think, around 7 or 8 years ago. And I have no clue what fabric I used. It looks like a 36 count, and I've used 2 strands, and I think if I were to stitch it again, which I would like to for myself, I would stitch it on 40 with 1 strand. It's a little on the bulky side on 36 count. And I've seen so many different adaptations of this where stitches have changed the tights or changed the text colour, and they're all absolutely fabulous. I would love to stitch it with purple tights and then maybe do a greyish purple text. And I still own the chart, and when I went looking for it in my stash, of course, couldn't find it, but I couldn't find any of my La-di-da charts, so I think at some stage I've taken them out to do something with and then misplaced them. I will find them, I'm sure. They'll turn up when I least expect them. So I will pop in a photograph of the chart. Now to the Halloween exchange that I did with my stitchy BFF April. April and I stitched 3 exchanges for each other, one in April for our shared birthday, one at Halloween, and then one at Christmas. And here is this year's Halloween exchange from April. Isn't it incredible? See if I can spin it around there. This is Yikesberry by Erica Michaels. And I love the little spider charm that April's added there. And I'll see if I can show you the top. There is a button hidden there amongst the ribbons. And April did a fabulous job on the seam there. And April tells me that she'd ordered the called for fabric from the States and it didn't arrive in time, so she had to dye some fabric herself, and she did an amazing job. I wouldn't have a clue where to start when dyeing fabric. But thank you so much, April. I love this. It is the perfect gift for me. And it looked really at home, nestled amongst the other Halloween ornaments that I've stitched over the years. And in fact, when my sister saw this on Instagram, she said, you better hide that away when I come visit, because otherwise it'll be coming home with me. So I think that was a really big hint that she wants me to stitch one for her. And I stitched for April another la-di-da chart called Smell My Feet, and I believe it was originally in a Halloween, maybe the Just Cross Stitch magazine some years ago, and Laurie is now offering it as a freebie on her website, the la-di-da website, so I will put in the link below. But I decided not to go with typical Halloween colours. I stitched it on Seafoam from Weeks Dye Works, and I gave the witch grey and white striped tights, and I trimmed it with some jack-o'-lantern buttons along the bottom, and I'll put a photograph in here. That pumpkin trim along the bottom was, shall we say, a tad tricky to attach, but I'm really pleased that I persisted with it because April seemed thrilled with her ornament. So all in all, another successful exchange, and I can't wait for our Christmas one now. And something else I wanted to share, because I don't think I have on one of my Flosstube videos yet, is the Halloween exchange that April sent to me a couple of years ago. This is Hocus Pocus by Shepherd's Bush, and it's one of their designs whereby if you purchase the button you get the chart for free, and it was stitched on quite a large count Hessian, and I love the effect. April painted and sanded the frame too. Too good not to share. And now on to my previous Halloween stitches. The first one was actually quite a recent finish. In fact, I think I showed this on my previous video, half finished. This is Halloween by the Queen Bee Handmade, who is on Etsy. And I'll show you the chart because it comes with a scissor fob chart too, the witch's feet there. And I decided to, rather than stitch it as a separate scissor fob, just stitch the witch's feet on the reverse. And I almost prefer the reverse to the front. And I stitched this on 36 count green poison from XG Designs and just attached 4 pom-poms in the corners. And I filled it with lavender scented walnut shells. I'm really pleased with that. And then the next few ornaments all came from this one magazine, Just Cross Stitch, the Halloween edition from 2012, which was a fabulous edition. As I said, I've already stitched 3 designs from it, but there are several more that I would really like to stitch. First up, no, it's not on the front cover, is it? This is Fraidy Cat's Welcome by Glendon Place, and I just stitched the inside of the design. I've got them all lined up like little soldiers here. That's Fraidy Cat's Welcome, and then I stitched a little pumpkin. He's not a happy chappy, is he? On the reverse, 2013. And it has a beaded edge. I do like my beaded edges, don't I? I can finish other ways other than beaded edge, but most of the ones that I'm going to show today do have beaded trim. And then we have Batty Jack, there, who is by Buonaugurio. And April calls him the Halloween panda. When I first showed it, she thought it was a panda. It's actually a white pumpkin. and this is stitched on 36 count copper penny from Lakeside Linens. And little cat on the reverse there, 2013. And from the same page, next up is Boo, and he's by Flosstube. And I added a couple of green beads for the cat's eyes. And of course, a pumpkin on the reverse. What else? Was that 2013 too? Yeah. And then we have a couple of ornaments that I've stitched from this design, which is by Blue Ribbon Designs, Afraid of the Dark. I used the skeleton here and the pumpkin with the cat on top of it. Mr. Bones is up first. And this was, it looks to be a bit sparkly, so I think it's just a raw opalescent fabric. And of course, a pumpkin on the reverse. And not a beaded edge this time. That was the pumpkin with the cat. And then the gravestone and a crow on the reverse. Now to Prairie Schooler. This is the pumpkin patch, and I used this chart here, chose two of the motifs to make a double-sided ornament with a pumpkin on one side and then the witch on the reverse. And again, it's a bit sparkly, so it's that raw opalescent linen. And then from, now I never pronounce this right, is it Hinzeit? Boo. And this came with a little ghost charm. You can see that there. And then I stitched a Quaker symbol on the back in 2019. And this purple linen was one that April dyed for me. Doesn't really show up as purple, does it? But it is, it's quite a nice lilac-y purple. And the last two, I don't have the charts for, I've passed the stash, but I will put in a photograph of the charts. First up is Halloween Garden by Raise the Roof Designs. And this is stitched on 36 count relic from Picture This Plus. And A Little Boo by Lizzie Kate. I seem to remember this was a kit, but I don't think I used this fabric that came with it. This again is that opalescent raw linen. And as I said, I'll put the photographs of the charts in here. Purchases. I have been very good this month and have just 3 purchases to share, all 3 of which are charts. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, 2 of the charts are Halloween charts. Are you fed up with Halloween yet? I promise, once I've shared these, that's it. You won't hear any more about Halloween from me this year. The lovely Sally, who is the Humble Bumble Stitcher on Instagram, was selling some of her charts, and I managed to nab Hilda and Sunflowers Too from Brenda Gervais with Thy Needle, and also Gone Batty, another Brenda Gervais chart. And Sally very kindly included the fabric for me. So thank you so much, Sally. Can't wait to get stitching on that. And then I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this is my first ever chart from Jacob at Modern Folk Embroidery, but it certainly won't be the last. April and I have decided to have a Christmas Day start. So we have both downloaded the Moonshine cabin. Isn't that pretty? And I'm definitely going to stitch it on that bluey black fabric. I love how the cabin pops. So yeah, starting that on Christmas Day with April, our first ever sell. And now to Stitchy Kindness. My friend Sharon, who is Nana McStuffins on Instagram, has been showing some really creative finishes on her Instagram page lately. And I happened to comment on one where she had trimmed an ornament with some fabulous pom-pom trim. And she said, Christina, I have loads of it left. Would you like me to send you some? And of course I said yes. So this came through the post this week. Fabulous orange and green. I really need to start thinking outside the box when it comes to finishing, don't I? I've really done the beaded edge to death. And Sharon also sent some of her lovely Flosstube cards. So thank you so much, Sharon. And I will put some photographs of Sharon's fabulous finishes in here. And now to the most amazing gift from my stitchy friend Barbara, who lives just around the corner from me. If you remember, it is Barbara that finally taught me how to do French knots after 35 years of stitching. And before I show you what Barbara gifted me, I wanted to say that before I started reproducing samplers, I wasn't very familiar with speciality or specialty stitches. I knew the obvious ones like satin, stitch and eyelets, but not many others. And since reproducing samplers, how I get around things or how I deal with this is if there is a stitch that I'm unfamiliar with, I take a close-up photograph, I send it to April, who is the queen of speciality stitches, and if she doesn't know what it is, and she often does, then Darlene Osteen does. April owns The Proper Stitch by Darlene Osteen. And I was chatting to Barbara about this and said, oh, April has this amazing book, and Barbara said, I own that book. Oh yes, you really need to get yourself a copy. It is the most comprehensive guide to speciality stitches. So Barbara had a search on the internet for me and managed to find one, I think it was on eBay, for a reasonable-ish price, and she sent me the link, and I thought, right, I'm going to treat myself to that. Well, the following morning there was a knock at my door and Barbara was on the doorstep holding her copy of the book, and she said, I want you to have this. She said, you are going to use this far more than I ever will. I could have cried. And it's the ring bound version. I have already put it to good use. I received the most amazing sampler through the post last week, and it was stitched by a little girl called Sarah, and she'd stitched an alphabet in a stitch that was unfamiliar to me. So I had a look in my book and discovered that it is the rice stitch. So thank you so much, Barbara. As I said, I've already put it to good use. I'll treasure it forever. So to Black Sampler November. I think it was around 2 months ago that Jacob from Modern Folk Embroidery got in touch and asked if I'd like to get involved with what he was calling Black Sampler November, a hashtag to be used by stitchers throughout November for them to stitch on black samplers. And when Jacob from Modern Folk Embroidery gets in touch and asks if you'd like to get involved with something, well, you say yes, don't you? The only problem being I haven't yet released a sampler that's stitched entirely in black. I do have a few previous releases that would certainly lend themselves to being stitched in black. My first ever release, Miss Emily Harbin, when I first saw Emily's sampler on an auction website, I assumed she was stitched in black, and it wasn't until she arrived and I opened up the parcel and my first words were, "Green thread?" She does, however, look fabulous in green, but I think she would look just as good stitched in black. I have the Eve Sisters samplers, both stitched in a very dark blue silk. They would look great in black. My bestseller, my red sampler, Miss Florence May Piggin, I have seen her stitched in black and she looked lovely. The list could go on, but I did really want to release my own black sampler. I did have an idea of using an antique sampler that's stitched entirely in black that I own, using elements from it to design a drum or a pincushion, but for one reason or another, October was a very unproductive month in this household, so it just didn't get done. So with around 2 weeks until the end of October, I was sat twiddling my thumbs thinking, what am I going to do? And I have for a while had an idea in my head of designing a long, narrow sampler. So I wondered if I could combine the two ideas. And that's what I did. And here we have my Black Sampler 2021. Such an original name. And as you can see, it's long and narrow. When I was stitching this, my mum and dad came over to visit and my mum said, "What are you stitching? A bookmark?" Did I mention that I've got a family full of comedians? And as you can see, if I give you a close-up, I did bend the rules a little and I've added a few extra colours. Just 6 in total. And I stitched the model on 36 count raw linen from Zweigart, so that should be quite easy to get a hold of. It is full cross stitch, although I have included some speciality stitches here, some satin stitch hearts. The stitch count is 61 by 236, and as I said, there are 6 colours, and I used Weeks Dye Works colours for the model, but I do provide a DMC conversion. And the chart, the PDF download, is available from my website. And I am really looking forward to seeing what stitchers stitch during Black Sampler November. Now to the second of my new releases, Miss Mary Vallack 1781. I'll show you Mary's original sampler. Isn't it stunning? The primary school teacher in me was definitely drawn to love your learning. However, we all know that the reason I bought Mary's sampler was for this beautiful satin stitch band. And I first saw Mary's sampler on an auction house website around 18 months ago. Unfortunately, the auction was postponed because of the pandemic. So for several weeks I had to keep on checking in to see if a new date had been arranged. And when it had, I pushed myself way out of my comfort zone and booked a phone line just in case our internet went down and I was unable to bid online. Only our internet never goes down. But just to be doubly sure, on the day of the auction, I got my husband to sit beside me on his laptop so he could bid online just in case there was a problem with my mobile phone reception. Only there's never a problem with my mobile phone reception. So I hope you get the impression or realise how much I really wanted Mary's sampler. And on the day of the auction, when we were sat there waiting anxiously for the lot to come up, I said to my husband, we haven't decided on a limit of what I can go to for Mary's sampler. And Tom said, look, you really like it, just go for it. However, the lot before Mary's, which was also a sampler, went for £3,500, and I watched the colour just drain from Tom's face. I'm pleased to report that we managed to get Mary's sampler for considerably less than that, thank goodness. So I'll show you my reproduction, which is a lot smaller than Mary's. I stitched the reproduction on 36 count beech brew from R&R Reproductions, and the stitch count is 117 by 116. I used Weeks Dye Works colours, and there are just 11 colours used, and I do provide a DMC conversion in the chart. There are quite a few speciality stitches. We have a row of Algerian eyelets. We have a row of Roman stitch, which I was unfamiliar with. A row of Queen stitch, which I was only vaguely familiar with. We obviously have the satin stitch band here. And there is, over one, there is an alphabet, the lowercase alphabet that's in over one. There is over one in Mary's name, the date, and then the Love Your Learning declaration at the bottom. I do provide a stitch guide to all of these within the chart. As I said, I was only vaguely familiar with Queen stitch, but I did manage to find some really good tutorials on YouTube. One that I found particularly useful was a tutorial from Jan Hicks, and I will link that down below. Thank you, Jan, was really helpful. The Roman stitch was one I just had no clue what it was. So I took, as I've mentioned earlier in my videos, I took a close-up photograph, sent it to April. It wasn't one that she was familiar with either, although it did turn out that there were some Roman stitches in a drawn thread chart that she has, but she just had a quick look in the Proper Stitch by Darlene Osteen, and she messaged me back, it's the Roman stitch. And I actually think it almost appears to be, it's a very simple stitch, but it appears to be a training stitch for the Queen stitch. It's one of the centre stitches, if that makes sense. But it's another stitch that I really enjoyed doing. The Queen stitches I thought I would find really fiddly, and don't get me wrong, they are a little tricky to do, but I just took my time with them. I did maybe a dozen a day and then worked elsewhere on the sampler, and actually ended up really enjoying them, and they do look fabulous. So who was our little Mary? Well, when I received Mary's original sampler, it was in pretty grim condition. At least the frame was. It had considerable water damage, but I could make out on the back of the frame somebody had written Mary Vallack Maker, and I at the time assumed that it just meant Mary was the maker of the sampler. But I have since discovered that Mary was born in Kingsand in the parish of Maker, Cornwall. Just to complicate matters a little, at the time of Mary stitching her sampler, Kingsand was considered sometimes to be in the county of Devon, but it's definitely in Cornwall now. And my friend Carol, who is Carol X Stitch on Instagram and Samplers and Stitches on Etsy, I will link below. Carol lives in Cornwall and she contacted me and asked if I would like her to go to the Rhine Peninsula and take some photographs of where Mary had lived. And of course I said yes. So she and her little Westie, Alfie, had a day trip and took some fantastic photographs. I only wish I could have joined them. It looked like the perfect day out. Can you imagine waking up to a view like that every morning? Such a gorgeous part of the country. Anyway, back to our Mary. You would think that having an unusual surname like Vallack and knowing the general area of where Mary was from, that research would have been fairly straightforward for me. However, there were no censuses in the 18th century, so I had to rely quite heavily on baptismal records. I did also get quite a bit of help from the Torpoint Library, and it was the library that suggested I get in touch with Crescent Kerno. At the time, I assumed that Crescent Kerno was a person, but if you're watching this in Cornwall, you know that Crescent Kerno is Cornish for the Cornwall Centre. I'm so sorry. I'm learning something new every day. And Crescent Kerno hold several documents pertaining to the Vallack family, and it turns out that they were quite the formidable family in Cornwall and Devon during the 18th and 19th centuries, and I do include some of this information in the chart. But what about our Mary specifically? Well, she was born in 1771 to William Vallack and Mary Salmon, so this would have made her around 10 at the time of stitching her sampler. She had a sister, Sarah, and a brother, William. When she's in her mid-20s, she marries her first cousin, Joseph Vallack, so no need to change her surname. And Joseph was quite the character. He was a Royal Marine who had quickly risen through the ranks to captain, and he actually took part in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, and it was this that cemented his naval legacy. He was injured in the battle but would go on to serve in the Royal Marines for a further 21 years, and he was elevated to the highest possible rank of the Marines at the time, which was Lieutenant Colonel. And subsequently he was knighted by William IV for his services to his country. Wow. Joseph and Mary had just 3 children together, and I say just because Mary's brother and his wife had 22 children. Not that it's a competition. But Joseph and Mary's children, they had 3 girls, Ellen, Emma and Elizabeth, all the E's. Who would name their children with the same initial? Mary passes away when she is 62 in 1834, which also happens to be the year that Joseph was knighted. Anyway, I could go on, but as I said, there is more information about Mary and her family in the chart, and the chart can be downloaded from my website from today. Oh. I'd like to end my video by sharing an update on the amount raised by my fundraiser chart that I released on October the 1st to raise money for breast cancer research and awareness during the month of October, and that was the very lovely Eliza M. Stone, 1881. And I'll put the amount up on the screen here. It is still creeping up, and there were a few additional donations. Several stitchers in Australia and New Zealand and America had got in touch with me and asked if I minded if they made donations to breast cancer charities local to them, and I said absolutely. But more than £5,000, I just cannot believe it. I said in my Instagram post this week that I had set an initial target of £500, but had quietly hoped that it would get close to £1,000. And in fact, in the first 24 hours, we had almost reached £1,000. And the lovely Deb, who owns Eliza's original sampler, had woken up very early on that Saturday morning and seen that we were nearly at £1,000, and she made an additional donation so that when I woke up on that Saturday morning, we'd met that target. And it's that act of kindness for me that sums up the generosity of this incredible stitching community. More than £5,000. That will make a difference to lots of people all over the world who are battling this horrible, horrible disease. I had so many messages on the donations page and via email, people telling me of their own experiences of breast cancer or how it has affected family members or friends. But there were also messages of inspiration and stories of hope. Gosh, October was such an emotional month, but thank you just does not seem enough. Thank you for everyone that donated. Thank you to Deb for loaning me Eliza's original sampler, and thank you to Eliza Maria Stone. Imagine what she would make of all of this. So on that note, thank you for watching and take care, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.